Good morning, everyone. As promised, we are doing Ask Dr. Doreen for the first time on Facebook Live. I'm here in a different setting outside the studio with Dr. Doreen Granpichet, and she's going to be answering your questions in just a few minutes. I want to do a couple of quick housekeeping things for Autism Live before we get started. I want to remind everybody that we are going to be back in the studio next Wednesday, and we've got some amazing guests for you coming up next Wednesday. Jess Block-Niren is going to be with us and talking about the book that her son wrote. It's going to be a very exciting show. We're going to have Dr. Doreen Granpichet back then. And on Thursday, we've got some amazing doctors, and we're trying to firm up at some point in this month, it might be on Thursday, we are going to have people from Homeland Security talking with us about how we keep our kids safe on the internet. It's going to be really exciting, and I'm talking about our kids, right? Which takes a little bit extra. I also want to say, and I put it out of my arm reach, we've done a lot in the last couple of weeks since we've been with you guys. Last night, I don't know if you can see this, we were at Autism Awareness Night at Dodger Stadium, and it also happened to be bobblehead night. So here is this fabulous Howie Kendrick bobblehead that we are going to be giving away today. There are two steps to what you have to do, and we're going to be mentioning this throughout the show. The first thing that you need to do is share that we are doing Ask Dr. Doreen on Facebook Live, okay? And then there's going to be a second part of it, but you have to have completed the first part in order to be eligible for the second part, okay? Shout out to Amy Zhang, who's watching. Good morning, Amy. Thrilled that you're here with us. Also want to say that on Saturday night, we were live from the Ed Asner Celebrity and Friends poker tournament. Got to meet the fabulous Rosie O'Donnell. So thrilling. If you haven't checked that out, make sure that we were live there. Check it out. And so many different card offices that we have been able to visit in the last couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about that a little bit with Dr. Granpichet in just a minute. Remember that you can be writing in questions. In just a minute, I'm going to get this camera off of my ugly mug and put it on Dr. Granpichet. But any question that you have, we've already got some that have been sent in previously, but if you have a question, just write it in on the screen, okay? And don't forget, if you want to win the bobblehead, the first thing you need to do is share that you are watching Ask Dr. Doreen live on Facebook, okay? We'll tell you what the second thing is a little bit later on. But at this point, I want to welcome to Facebook Live, it's the first time, Dr. Doreen Granpichet. For those of you who don't know her, she is a world-renowned expert in the field of autism. She is a light in all of our lives. She's a visionary. She's been working with individuals on the autism spectrum for more than 30 years. I hate telling on her because you'll see in a second that she looks like she's freshly minted. But she has been working in this field and helping so many different individuals. My husband's watching. Woohoo! Thrilled to have my husband watching. But anyway, Dr. Granpichet is here. She's going to answer your questions. So I'm going to turn the camera. Dr. Granpichet, there she is. Welcome to Facebook Live.
That's so exciting.
It is very exciting. We're going to jump in and get started with some questions here. We have a question that came in on Facebook, and this mom has been waiting because we've been on a little bit of a hiatus, both you and I.
So let me just quickly say good morning to all of our viewers. Yeah. I've been gone for a few weeks, and I want to thank everybody for staying tuned, and we're excited. This is our first time on Facebook Live, and hopefully it'll work out. So thanks everyone for joining.
We're praying for internet, strong internet. Okay, so dear Dr. Doreen, this is our first question. Can you give some ideas as to how to teach story comprehension? As in listening to stories that's presented at school and answering questions about them afterwards. What's the first step that needs to be taught? My son is almost 4 years old with ASD, and thank you so much. So sure. Story comprehension.
So this was one of the very early things that we wanted to focus on. I remember many years ago when I started working with kids on the spectrum, I remember thinking this is one of the key areas that we need to work on, and it still is one of the problem areas for our kids. And like everything else in ABA, the answer is that you break it down into very small chunks and you teach the individual steps first, and then you chain the behavior. So What that means is that you would generally just start with the shortest type of question that you possibly could. So for instance, you'll show the child a picture of something and say, this is whatever, this is big, or this is red, or her name is Sally, or some fact that is very short, and then you will immediately ask that same question. What's her name? So her name is Sally, and you'll say, what's her name? And then obviously, because it's sort of an immediate recall situation, your child will most likely be able to answer that. So then what you do is you will increase the length of what you're saying. So you'll say, this is Sally, and she lives in Idaho. And then you'll go back and say, what was her name? What is her name? And so you'll have a secondary fact in the middle of the question that you're about to ask. So you'll have two facts, and then you ask a question about the first fact. And then essentially, that's how you build a story. I mean, you know, we would generally go with one first, and then two, and then three. And when you're up to three basic phrases, of course, then you have to ask different types of questions as well. So for instance, this is Elmo. Elmo likes chicken nuggets. Elmo goes to McDonald's, that type of thing. And then you'll say, what did Elmo like? What was his name? And where does he go? And those are all different types of questions. So immediately you know that a prerequisite lesson is knowing the WH questions. And that's a separate lesson where you go one by one, and it takes a while to teach the child to answer a series of what questions, where questions, who questions, and so on, why questions, and so on. There's a series of them. So, you know, every task that we want to teach our kids, even if it sounds like a very simple thing, which is just listening to a story and answering questions, you come to realize that there's all these more basic prerequisite skills that also have to be taught first. So in this case, you want to make sure your child is able to answer, like, understands the concept of different locations, different people, and has a whole series of attributes and adjectives that they're familiar with, colors, shapes of objects, functions of objects, all these types of things, because you're going to be asking questions about that content. And then you want to make sure the child is pretty proficient in the answering of WH questions. That's a separate lesson. And then you will start this, which is the short, you know, give one fact and ask a question, give two facts and ask a question. And then you will rotate the types of questions. So, and then, of course, you get to a point where you will have a whole paragraph. Now, it always helps our kids. Usually, our kids are much more visual. It helps them to be able to do reading comprehension, or to be able to see the page. And then, of course, the last or most difficult is to read the child a whole paragraph or even a page without them seeing, but being able to pick the more salient and important facts. It often helps our children to be able to kind of take notes. Teaching a child to organize their thoughts and take notes is a very, very valuable skill. So that's a separate thing where you basically, for instance, the child can, as you're telling the story, you can teach the child how to write all the names they hear, and all the places, and all the, like, you know, little notes about each person. And that's a whole separate lesson. So all of these things kind of come together to be able to teach listening comprehension. For a better review of these, I will refer you to Skills, and so which is www.skillsforautism.com. And when you go there, and if you answer a series of questions about your child, just so we can assess the skill level your child currently has, then you'll be directed to all of these lessons anyway. And if you just want to kind of play around on Skills and find these lessons, I believe most of this type of conversational stuff, like reading comprehension, will most likely, reading comprehension and probably listening comprehension will be in the academic curriculum. But all the basic prerequisite lessons that I mentioned are either going to be in the language curriculum or in the social curriculum, and you can always search and it will find all these lessons for you and give you a lot more detail.
Spectacular. Me here for a second. We want to thank Richard for joining us, and we're going to take your question next. I just want to do a brief follow-up on this question that we were asking that about teaching comprehension. There's a section in the Recovered video that shows Vince Redmond teaching Jana the very beginning steps that you were talking about comprehension. And I think for a lot of parents, we think that when we're watching that, it looks like it goes so slowly, so slowly. But one of the things I want to encourage people is to watch Recovered, because you see Jana at the early stages of what you were just talking about, and then you get to see her further along, and you see that the progress that is made. It is something that requires a little bit of patience, don't you think, Dr. Grandpichet?
Absolutely does, because you come to see how our kids will get sort of distracted, or they will forget. This is called working memory, being able to hold information online even if other information is coming at you. But many of our kids have a hard time with working memory, because you'll tell them a second fact or a third fact and the child will be like, the first one's gone, you know, and it's hard for them. And that's just the mind, it's kind of a memory practice skill. And the more you practice these, the better the child gets. And you're right. Thank you for remembering that. That is exactly showing kind of the sequence of events when you're working on listening comprehension.
Really powerful stuff, though. But again, we thank Richard for writing in a question. His question is, when a child is having a meltdown, is it common that they will not remember what they did? We've got why. I'm not sure whether it's why or what they did during the meltdown. Can you talk to us a little bit about meltdown?
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects to this, and thank you, Richard. Great question, very deep question. You know, as a behavior analyst, you always have to kind of ask yourself, what is the function of the behavior? So if a child is having a meltdown, it's very important to note why they are having that meltdown. Meltdowns are usually an expression of frustration, so it's really important to determine what caused the frustration. Is the child unable to express themselves in some way? Like, are they not getting their point across, which is usually why our kids kind of lose it? Or are they just doing that because that has become their way of winning? So, you know, a child might have a meltdown because they've realized every time I have a meltdown, I kind of get my way. They might have a meltdown because when they have a meltdown, people give them the things they want. There's many different reasons, and it's really important to have the ability to identify that function, the reason for the meltdown, in order to be able to deal with it and in order to be able to intervene correctly. Now, the psychologist in me says, you know, meltdowns are traumatic to begin with. They're not extremely traumatic, but they are. You know, biochemically, you essentially, all sorts of chemicals are produced in your body, and you are, you know, depleting yourself of a series of neurotransmitters. You basically, you know, you have a surge of neurotransmitters where your emotion, dopamine, is all over the place, and serotonin is down, and your you know, your system is not in a homeostasis process. It's definitely in an overload process. And so whenever your neurotransmitters are not balanced, you will have difficulty remembering what's going on. So an example of that, it's funny because this morning I had such a hard time remembering some stuff, and I was saying I've just gone through a personal tragedy, and whenever you have any kind of traumatic events go on in your life, you also lose memory. Memory is one of the things that's associated with all of those balanced neurotransmitters. And so it is not uncommon for a child to not be aware of what they're doing during the meltdown. It is somewhat traumatic. The child is out of control. And also remember that when a child hits or aggresses during a meltdown, they're not doing it out of spite or anything evil. They're just angry, they're frustrated, they're just lashing out. So we as adults tend to label those behaviors, and the child doesn't. From the child's perspective, there is this, you know, hitting someone is just the same as screaming or hitting themselves. They're just frustrated. So it is very common that the child won't recall any of what they did. And to be honest, it isn't important what they did, because The truth is that whatever it was, if it was an inappropriate way of communicating, which most meltdowns are, then it's important to teach the child an alternate way of communicating, which would be language or some form of nonverbal communication, to replace the meltdown. So really, what happens during a meltdown is not at all important. It's just important to identify why the meltdown is happening and then to replace it with something more appropriate.
Wonderful. I hope that, Richard, let us know if you want further information about that. Peggy has written into us from Germany. She says, much love from Germany.
Nice.
My son is 3 on the spectrum. I wonder, how can I get him to eat and also eat different things? Since months, he only eats one certain food. And she says, thank you.
Hi, Peggy. My ex-husband is German, so my children grew up knowing German as well, and we go to Germany quite a bit. So nice to have someone from Germany logging in.
And Richard says thank you, by the way, too.
Oh, my pleasure. This is kind of fun, being able to communicate with people all over the world.
Fun.
It's awesome. So, Peggy, eating one thing is a big thing, is a very common issue with autism. We have a lot of children become very, very picky with the object that they're eating, or they narrow their diet to one object. Now, why is that? So let's talk about that for a minute, and then we'll talk about how to make it a broader diet. So in my opinion, what happens with children, with us, with adults, let's say you go to a restaurant and you'll eat some kind of food. Let's say you'll have sauerkraut. And you won't feel good. You'll come home and you don't feel well the next day. What happens as an adult is that you will now no longer eat sauerkraut, and you will not eat foods that are similar. So you'll think, oh, maybe I shouldn't eat other types of cabbage as well. Oh, maybe I shouldn't go to that restaurant. Maybe it was something having to do with that particular restaurant. So that's called generalization, response generalization. You won't just eliminate sauerkraut. You'll eliminate the things that are similar to it, and possibly even things that are connected but not related. So the restaurant, it could have nothing to do with the restaurant, but in your mind there's a connection, so you'll avoid the restaurant because you didn't feel well. What happens with our children is they will eat certain things and they don't feel good. It doesn't make them feel good. It makes them feel bloated, let's say. Let's say our children might eat dairy, and the dairy might not feel well, or some other food. So over time, they will get rid of that food, but they will also get rid of other foods that look the same or feel the same, because they're children. They don't think the way we think. So for instance, a child might decide, okay, I don't feel well when I have broccoli, or it doesn't taste good, I don't want broccoli. So definitely then they will also avoid green beans and other green vegetables just because broccoli is green. Or they'll have a different type of food that's mushy, let's say mashed potatoes, and they don't like it, it makes them gag, they have a reflex to it. So then they'll start to avoid other foods that are also mushy, any other food, and they'll start to really select very crunchy foods only, and will only eat chips or carrots or things that are crunchy because it's the opposite of something that made them feel bad. So that's happening. So on the one hand, this is called learned behavior. The children are learning to generalize, wrong generalization, but they overcompensate, they overgeneralize, and they'll stop eating certain types of foods. The other thing that's happening is that's very important to pay attention to, is that the child will crave certain foods that give them a feeling of endorphins. Now this is really important because our children tend to want to eat a lot of gluten products that have gluten, which is the protein in whole grains. So of course wheat and all the grains will have gluten in them. Gluten has the tendency, because of the shape, when you eat gluten, when you eat anything, any protein, the protein breaks down to peptides and then amino acids. So there's 2 stages of breakdown. What we've learned is that many of us, not just children with autism, but many people don't break down to the amino acid level. They just break down to peptide chains, which is sort of a bunch of amino acids attached to each other. Those chains will then leak through the gut, and will go through the blood-brain barrier and will mimic endorphins. Those peptide chains of gluten resemble very much our own body's endorphins, which means, basically, short version means when you eat gluten, let's say French fries, you will feel endorphins. You'll feel kind of high, like a little bit dizzy, a little bit out of it, like as if you've had alcohol, as an example, a little drunk. So children will crave those particular foods, and at the same time they're eliminating the other foods that they didn't feel well. So as a result, over time they become very picky. Now, the psychologist, again, in me says that there's also an anxiety factor related. When you're trying to exert control over your environment, you're not willing to try too many new things. You just want things to be the same. So you're only going to try the foods that you know are okay, and it becomes very, very narrow. I've had children narrow their diet all the way down to like one food, which is, let's say, perfect shaped Cheerios, which becomes very, very difficult, of course. And there's no doubt there's an anxiety factor there as well. They become obsessive compulsive, and it's very important to handle all of that. So now, what do? It's very simple what you do. You take the preferred food, and the preferred food now becomes the reinforcer. This is called the Premack principle. You use something that is desired, preferred, to increase the occurrence of things that are not preferred. So you'll take, let's say, you'll get a baseline of what the child is eating right now. Let's say the child is eating 3 different types of foods. First, you want to look and see if they have anything in common. Are they all crunchy? Are they all soft? Are they all breaded products? You have to see why the child has narrowed down, because the reason that's important is if your child's eating only crunchy foods, then you want to make a note that you also need to introduce non-crunchy foods. That becomes an issue, something you have to teach. So you make a list of all the things the child's eating. That's your baseline, and now you want to increase that baseline. You will take another food, something completely good for the child, let's say, I don't know, a turkey breast, whatever it is, and you'll say, this is what I want the child to eat. Now what you do is you'll take a whole plate of the preferred food and 1 spoon of the non-preferred food. So you'll say, you will eat 1 spoon of this, and I'm going to give you the rest of this stuff. So you use the preferred food as reinforcement. And often it helps also to have an additional reinforcement in the room, like a TV. You'll have the television on and the child is eating their preferred food, and what you do is you will offer them 1 piece of turkey, and of course they'll tantrum and scream and cry and all this sort of stuff, and you will no longer give the preferred food unless they take this 1 spoon of turkey. And it could be just half a spoon, it could be a quarter of a spoon, it's the smallest amount. You give that, and then you allow them to have the rest of their preferred food. You turn on the TV, you make it fun, all this sort of stuff. Next day, or the next meal, you require now 2 spoons of turkey, and they get a ton of their preferred food. The next day, 3 spoons of turkey, and they get a ton. And this way you gradually increase the food that they did not want to eat. And it's a process, let me tell you. It'll take generally a couple of weeks to introduce 1 new food. And once you've done that, then you put that second food away, and now you go to a third food, and another new food, and you do the same thing with the other new food, and you eventually get to the point where your child is willing now to have a decent amount of the other foods and then some of their preferred food. And that's really how we all are as children, and it goes to the point of, like eat your vegetables before you have your dessert type thing. And that's where your hope is that you'll get there. It does take a while. Feeding is one of the things that ABA is very, very good at. But, if you can get a specialist to help you, that would be great. If you can't, I believe we have some feeding information, perhaps some videos about feeding on our IBT website, which is Institute for Behavioral Training. I believe the website is ibehavioraltraining.com. Please go on there and look for feeding, and it'll give you some information on how to develop a feeding program. I think in the past we might have also loaded one of my PowerPoints on the autism-live show. I've done a lot of training on feeding for different people, and it's important that it is a very step-by-step process and that you do it very gradually, because if you overload the child with something they don't want, they will throw up and gag, and the whole process will become aversive, and you don't want that. So, and it's important, of course, that whatever you are introducing to the child is healthy and good for them. So when doing feeding, I also recommend that you do make sure you're not giving the child something they're allergic to, or that might cause problems for their gastrointestinal system. Very long answer. I apologize. I hope that was helpful, Peggy.
I think that was really helpful. We're about halfway into the show. I want to take just a second to talk about, for those of you who are watching, if you missed the start of the show, this is a bobblehead, a Howie Kendrick bobblehead. We were at the Dodger game last night, the Autism Awareness Dodger game, and we are going to be giving this away. The first step is for you to share that you're watching Ask Dr. Doreen on Facebook Live. This is the first time we've ever done it on Facebook Live, and we welcome all of you. Eileen had written in and said, we use ABA daily, and it's excellent. She's got another question that we're going to get to in a second. Peggy said, that is great about the question. She says, I will absolutely do that. You've helped me so much. Thank you, because it's so hard to get help and a lot of information here in Germany. And Peggy, please check out on Autism Live. We've got a bunch of different videos for you as well. And we've been doing Ask Dr. Doreen for several years, and the questions are all coded. You can go to the beginning and watch the first 2 minutes and see all the questions that are asked during the episode. And that's, if you go to YouTube, youtube.com/autismlive. That's where you can go, and they're all free videos. So, but right now, if you want to win the Howie Kendrick, we're going to be telling you in 15 minutes the second step. But the first step is you have to tell people on Facebook that you are watching Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh. She's a true expert in the field of autism, been working in this field for 30 some odd years. I hate telling on her, but she's helped so many individuals. And we've had a question that came in that I got to stop everything for this question. Shyamal has written in and said, what is ABA? So Dr. Granpeesheh, perhaps you can enlighten them.
Sure. So ABA is Applied Behavior Analysis, and that is the science of taking operant conditioning or behavior modification or changing behavior and applying it to something of significance, something very important. Now, operant conditioning says that if you can change a behavior by changing its surrounding factors. So you can either change a behavior by changing its antecedents, the things that happen before the behavior, or by changing its consequences, the things that happen after the behavior. And an example would be, I want to change my eating behavior. Let's say I don't want to eat after 7 o'clock at night. That's the behavior that I want to change. So how do I manipulate antecedents and consequences? Okay, antecedents would be, I can put a lock on the fridge. I can put a big clock on my fridge that shows it's past 7 o'clock or before 7 o'clock. I can tell all the people that I know to not allow me to go to the fridge. All these types of things that I'm doing are things that I do before the behavior occurs, and they help the behavior change. Then there's consequence manipulation, so I can change the consequences. So if I go to the fridge, I can tell my friends or family to reprimand me or to tell me, no, you can't go. Or I could, various things, I could somehow do it so that it's punitive things happen to me if I go to the fridge. So this is how now my behavior of going to the fridge after 7 p.m. changes. Now with children with autism, any behavior, anything that a person does is considered behavior. And so what we try to do with autism is we want to increase some behaviors that are not enough, they're deficient. So for example, language. We want to increase the child's language. We want to increase the child's social skills. We want to increase the child's cognitive, executive functioning skills, planning, problem solving, those skills. And there are some behaviors that we want to decrease, like we would like to decrease tantrums, aggression, running away behavior, all those types of things. So the behaviors that we want to decrease, we want to make sure that that there's no environmental reinforcement. There's nothing that is rewarding those behaviors. And the behaviors that we want to increase, like language and so on, are the ones that we heavily reinforce. So really, a summary of ABA is you reinforce and increase positive, appropriate, adaptive behaviors, and you decrease challenging behaviors, and essentially over time you will then replace all the challenging behaviors with more adaptive and appropriate behaviors.
Wonderful. And Eileen says, I describe it as basic bribery, but it works so well, even with my hubby, LOL. And I just want to say, we refer to ABA as the Autism Miracle in our living room. ABA is what gave us our child back. ABA is what made everything possible. I think a lot of times people get concerned, Dr. Grampiche, that if we're giving people rewards for doing behavior that we feel like they should do anyway, that eventually it's going to be this thing that they're going to want something every time they do something. Right. We've experienced the exact opposite. That by setting up a circumstance in our home where our child got rewarded for doing things that we wanted to see, behaviors that we wanted to increase, like you were saying, that he learned and became a sponge. And there's all kinds of things that we don't reinforce him for anymore, right. But we've got a kid who learns and is excited to learn and is happy. I think that's one of the things that I'm happiest about, that we devoted so much time to ABA, is it was the best parent training. We have the best relationship with our child. He's happy, and he is able to do things that he couldn't do before. Right. Anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, it's really important, Shannon, for people to realize that ABA is kind of taken something that happens in day-to-day life and just turned it into a science, like made it much more structured and organized. But in day-to-day life, if you think about it, we all do behaviors that are reinforced, right? One way or another. Now, some of these are good for us and some of them are bad for us. Like we go to work because ultimately we get money, and perhaps we get prestige, and perhaps we get camaraderie from our friends, and perhaps it gives us also a sense of belonging. There's a lot of reasons we go to work, but primarily across the globe, people go to work in order to earn money. Money is a secondary reinforcer. That's what it is. It's a reinforcer that you can use to purchase other things. So everything in life is reinforcement based, if you really think about it. Now, some of these behaviors, as I said, are not adaptive. Like a lot of people will go to the bar and get completely hammered. And that is because that feeling of being drunk is a reinforcer for them. That could be a reinforcer in a multitude of different ways. It could make them feel happy. It could make them forget their problems. Both of those things are reinforcing. Regardless, everything we do is maintained by reinforcement. So ABA just takes that principle and makes it much more structured and organized, and then kind of like teaches people who are certified in this field how to use those principles in a way to actually actively engage children and teach them the things they haven't learned typically. So, you know, any child, typically developing child, will always do things because they want to please their parents. Initially, it's not like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old goes to school or a 6-year-old goes to school because they have plans for their future. No, the only reason they go to school is because the parent places them in school and then encourages them and is very, very happy about all their successes. And because the child eventually enjoys going to school because that's where their friends are. So unfortunately, both of those reinforcers are lacking from our children on the spectrum initially. In the very beginning, when our children are young, they're not aware enough of their parents' emotions. That's the theory of mind deficit. They don't have the ability to understand that and work for making their parents proud. Later on, that comes about, and then, of course, they start to learn very rapidly. But initially, they're very involved in their own being and existence and stuff, and they're not paying attention to how the parent views them. So they're lacking in that, in the motivation to please someone else, to please the parent. And because their language is delayed or their social skills are delayed, they don't enjoy being around other kids, or they don't know how to interact with other kids. So there is this factor, you know, that all the normal reinforcements that work for typically developing kids are absent for our children. And ABA, if done well in the very early years, kind of takes reinforcers in the environment and shapes them so that our children actually access those reinforcers and want to learn. And once you have the ability, and once a child understands that learning is useful, then they just continue to learn, as you said, and then they enjoy learning.
Yeah, it gets exciting. Coming in, and I want to tell Raquel from the UK, we're going to get to your question in just a second, but next we're taking from Lisa, how do I help my son to decrease his verbalization of everything that comes into his head?
Oh yeah, kind of a difficult thing. So essentially, and this is very hard for me to answer because I don't know your child, I don't know his level of functioning, but generally speaking, I'll be very general on this, is that when I've had children who will just kind of repeat everything, it's not necessarily everything that comes into their head, it's either what they hear now or they heard in the past. So for instance, it's stuff that they watch on TV, and it's some echolalia. It's essentially called echoing things that you've heard. Could be immediate echolalia, so I'll repeat something I just heard, or it could be delayed echolalia, which is I'm repeating something I heard on a TV show, and hey, it sounds really cool, so I'm going to repeat it. The best way to reduce that behavior, there's two things you have to do, and again, it depends on the level of functioning of the child. If it's a very sort of early stage for the child, and the child doesn't have a lot of understanding of abstract concepts, then what you do is you just give the child a series of statements that you want them to say, and they immediately repeat those. So you'll say, my name is whatever, and they'll say it, and you reward them. And then when they say their own thing, you take away a reward or you ignore it. So essentially you make a huge difference between the echolalia that you're trying to get rid of and the echolalia that you want them to commit to. So if you tell them to repeat you reward them. It's kind of like Simon Says. And if they just are repeating things on their own, you ignore that, or you actually, let's say, will turn off the TV, which will be taking away a reinforcer. You take away a toy that's causing the excitement that's leading to the echolalia, which is taking away a reinforcer. You take away a reinforcer. Now, if your child's a little bit more advanced and has the ability, you want to start teaching them the difference between saying and thinking. And that's a little bit of a more advanced lesson, but it is a very important lesson because a lot of children will just speak and they don't understand the difference between speaking and thinking. And that is a much more advanced and a little bit difficult because you have to model for the child what you're thinking. We use a lot of what we call comic strips, so you'll draw mommy and you'll have a little bubble and this is what I'm thinking, and you'll write in it, and this is what I'm saying, and you visually show that with a speech bubble or a speech sign, versus, you know, thoughts and saying, and you differentiate those. Now, there's many steps to this lesson, and the best way for you to do this, since I don't want to give you the steps, which will take me half an hour, is to go on skillsforautism.com, and actually look for this lesson, which is thinking versus saying. And I believe it's in the cognition curriculum, because this is having to do with our thoughts, beliefs, our knowledge, all the things that are in our head, and the things that we vocalize. This is entering now the world of perspective taking. This is one of the first lessons in the whole arena of our minds are different. Children who repeat things constantly have a real strong deficit in theory of mind. They don't understand that what's in their head is supposed to stay in their head, and it's completely different from what's in other people's minds and thoughts. So I would recommend you go in skills and you look at the cognition curriculum. That curriculum, all those lessons have to do with this concept.
And it's fascinating. I want to quickly, because we got a bunch of questions coming in, get to Raquel or Rachel, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, from the UK. She says, hi from the UK. How can I encourage my 7-year-old boy to drink more? When it's warmer weather, he eats and drinks a lot less, and his weight and hydration suffers. Thank you for writing in.
That's a great question, and it's a very easy question. You know, there's a couple of things you could do. You could add something that improves taste of the water. I mean, nowadays you see with children, they're drinking so much more of the vitamin water, which is really water with a tiny amount of fruit essence, which makes it a lot easier and much more palatable. Or you can put him on a schedule, which means basically you put a timer in the room, and every time the timer goes, he has to go over and get a sip. Or you just teach him the way that I was talking about feeding, which is you reinforce his eating and drinking behavior with something else. So let's say he wants to play with a particular toy. You teach him that every time you want to get this toy, you first have to go eat something or drink something. The healthiest way to do this is to just put him on a schedule, which most of us are. And the schedule, for instance, with water consumption, is very easy because you can have a container, a large container, which, you know, basically you're supposed to have double your weight in ounces. So, or is it, let me see, half your weight in ounces, So whatever his weight is, you know, fill a container with the amount of water you want him to drink every day, and give him a huge reward if he finishes it by the end of the day. And if that's very hard for him, help him initially, maybe turn it into 8 cups, and each time he finishes a cup, give him a big reward, and gradually get him to the point where he finishes all 8 cups in a day, and then he gets a big reward. Make it a visual thing for him. It's a lot easier teaching these good habits when you have young children than it is to teach ourselves when we're adults, because we get so distracted. But that's a very easy and basic kind of reinforcement schedule that you can put him on.
Wonderful. Okay, Laura wants to know, how can I get my high-functioning daughter to stop hitting? She hits out of frustration or when she doesn't get her own way. We're thanking everybody for writing in questions. I'm going to get to as many of them as I can. Don't go away. But this first one about a high-functioning daughter hitting.
So again, and good job figuring out the reason or the function of the behavior. The only way that she's going to, there's 2 things you need for her to stop hitting when she doesn't get her own way. She has to have a different way of communicating, and that way has to work. So in other words, if she hits, she still has to not get her own way, but if she asks, she has to get her own way. And you have to make that differentiation. So figure out a communication form for her to be able to get her own way, and it has to work. So she can't ask, you have to make sure that if she asks, she gets what it is she wants. If she hits, she doesn't. And if you can make that happen, those two circumstances, I guarantee you the hitting will go away. The asking will increase. The next difficult thing becomes, what if she asks and you can't give her what she wants? But then that's the second phase, and that's dealt with differently. So in your case right now, I think what you want to do is you want to make sure that she asks, she gets, she hits, she doesn't get, and then that will automatically fix the problem.
Okay, we have a question that's coming to us from Islamabad, Pakistan.
Wow.
They said, hi, this is me, Wajat Hussain. I am teaching autistic children in Islamabad, Pakistan. So what food should I suggest to autistic children's parents?
Well, that's a very difficult question because all children have different allergies, different reactions. Some children will have different preferences, obviously, but you know, the two foods that we've found in the United States, now I don't know if this is true in Pakistan because your food source is completely different than ours, but the two primary I guess food sources that are not good, that have been shown to cause some gastrointestinal problems for some children, are gluten and casein. The third and fourth are soy and corn. Those are the four top foods that have caused problems for some children on the spectrum. Gluten is the protein in whole grains. Casein is the protein in dairy. And then we have soya products and, of course, corn products. And in the United States, a lot of our foods have some form of corn in them. And our dairy is not necessarily very good. Our animals have been treated very differently than animals in other countries. So I don't know if these four would be the same in Pakistan. When I travel, I notice that other countries don't have the same type of dietary issues we have here in the United States. I would say, you know, if you're in Pakistan, you probably want to be careful with the normal things, like make sure the children are not ingesting too much sugar, because that'll make them very hyperactive. Perhaps try to see if the children do better with less gluten, you know, so don't give them things that contain gluten if you can. In many other countries, it's very hard to find things that are gluten-free. Here in the US, it's very common now to find gluten-free. And treat the children differently. Each child might have a reaction to one food and the next child won't. So that's a very difficult situation that you're in. I don't know if the children have resources to see doctors. They are able to do testing to see if these children, organic acid metabolite testing can generally tell you if a child should stop taking gluten or casein or soy or corn.
Wonderful. For everybody at this point, we went last night to Autism Awareness Night at Dodger Stadium. We have this fabulous bobblehead, a Howie Kendrick bobblehead. He hit a home run last night during the game. It was pretty exciting, and we said that's why he's a bobblehead. But we are giving this away. The first thing that you have to do, the first step, is to, on Facebook, put that you are, share on Facebook that you are watching Ask Dr. Doreen live on Facebook. And the step 2 that I promised we would give to you at this point in the program, you need to email me. I need to have an address from which to mail you. So we will pick at random from the people who did share and sent us their address. So you need to email me at as in Sam, .penrod, P-E-N-R-O-D, as in dog, at autism-live.com. Again, that's s.penrod at autism-live.com. That's if you want to win the bobblehead. But you have to have shared this information on Facebook that you were watching Ask Dr. Doreen on Facebook Live. Okay, our next question from Karen, and we're in the home stretch. Dr. Grandpichet has been working hard, but she's doing a great job. From Karen, she'd like to know, I'd love to learn more about what to do with adult siblings on the spectrum. My sister is in her 20s, and no one around us seems to understand that meltdowns are not necessarily age affiliated. I can see that somebody already emailed me. I can ask people to see the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown with a child, but they don't seem to realize that autism doesn't just go away because someone grew up.
That's right. Yes, and it's very interesting. It's very important, I think, for people to realize that tantrums and all these challenging behaviors are not part of the symptoms of autism. They're some of the side effects of autism. So not every individual with autism has tantrums, but every individual who's frustrated and doesn't know how to better communicate will have tantrums. So whether it's autism or, I don't know, some other illness that causes you to be isolated, or some other serious traumatic event, or whatever else it might be that causes you to feel so frustrated that you think the only way you'll get your point across is a tantrum, can occur at any age. It can occur at 2, it can occur at 40, it doesn't matter. Most of the time with us, all children will tantrum, and as you grow up, you realize and you learn more effective ways, and you realize that society will not accept tantruming. Now, if it's an individual with autism, unfortunately, they don't learn that society won't accept tantruming, and they don't give it up. Instead, they continue to tantrum because tantruming remains the only effective way to communicate. So the individual who's an adult, if they learned a more effective way to communicate, they would also stop tantruming. But for whatever reason, whether it's the depth of their disability or it's just what's in their environment, they're not currently learning a more effective way to communicate. And that's really, it does not matter what age they are.
We had so many questions, Dr. Graham, about tantrums. I want to take just a second to talk about when we're with someone who is on the autism spectrum, what should we be doing in the moment? Because we get nervous, we get tense. I know as a parent, when we used to experience this, I would think it was, honestly, I'm just being honest, I would feel like it was going to be the rest of my life, that the tantrum, there was a possibility that it could never end. Can you give us any tips and pointers for all ages? Are there, and does it change?
Yes. So, tantruming is really just an expression of frustration. It's when you are very young and you don't have any language, when you're 1, let's say, or below 1, when you're a baby, you'll tantrum for everything. You'll scream if you want mommy, you'll scream if you want your diaper changed, you'll scream if you're hungry, you'll scream if you're tired. So it is the primary form of communication. Now you become 1 and you'll learn mommy. And so now you realize every time I scream, people think maybe I need a diaper change, or it takes a while for people to figure out what it is. But if I say mommy, mommy appears immediately. So mommy becomes a much more effective form of communication. I'm going to use that. We figure out at around 1, 1.5, if I say chicken or nuggets, then I'll get the food I want. So that's much more effective than just screaming. But hey, if I want that toy and my sibling is playing with it, and I say, toy, or give me the toy, or whatever the toy's name is, my sibling still won't give it to me. But if I hit and if I tantrum, then I get it. So tantruming seems to be more effective than asking for a toy. So I'm going to keep tantruming. And then what happens is a parent or an adult comes and punishes. And then the child's like, oh, wait, tantruming isn't that good because I just got punished for tantruming and taking away that toy. So maybe I need to figure something else out. And so this process of development over time is just us figuring out what is the most effective reinforcer, what is the most effective form of communication that will get me access to my reinforcers. Initially, my reinforcer is just the object. Later on, my reinforcers become the object as well as the approval of my parent. So society then produces all these kind of additional reinforcers that we're striving for. I want to look cool. I don't want to lose my cool. I don't want to make my parents unhappy. I don't want to make my teacher unhappy. I don't want my friends to think I'm weird. And those are all the reasons that we stop tantruming. So when you're a parent and you have a child tantruming, don't think this is lifelong. It is not lifelong. Any tantrum, I don't care the severity of autism. I have had the most severe adults who are tantruming so much that they will put their head through a glass shield, okay? Severe adults, easily we have been able to teach them alternate forms of communication, and their tantrums are completely gone, completely gone. What you have to do is figure out what is causing the tantrum, make the environment fair. So you have to allow the individual ways, or you teach them ways to ask for things, ways to ask to get away from things, ways to escape things, ways to gain access to things, ways to request a break, ways to communicate how they feel. All those types of things will then help replace tantrums because they become more effective. And at the same time, the tantrum has to not be effective. So if your child is tantruming, or if you're an adult who's tantruming, don't get scared. Try actually to not deal with it at that moment, because most of the time when someone tantrums, we panic, we give them everything, and what you're doing is you're reinforcing the tantrum. Before you give them anything, please make sure that you at least teach the individual to vocalize, point to a picture, other ways communicate with you what they really want, so that you can reinforce that behavior. Teach the individual to communicate in alternate forms, reward those forms of communication, and do not give in to tantrums or challenging behavior.
Wonderful.
It's very hard, Shannon, and you know this, of course, and we just want to encourage all of our parents to not give up. It does seem very overwhelming, but when you break it down and you deal with one thing at a time, it becomes manageable.
Wonderful. I want to have 4 minutes left. For those of you who are writing in and saying thank you so much for doing this, I want to point out and let you know that we've been doing this for a long time. Autism Live has a series of videos, and we have a lot of taped versions of Ask Dr. Doreen, and they all live on YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/autism-live, and there's a whole series of playlists that are Ask Dr. Doreen. In the first minute of each one of them, as you start the video, you can see all the questions that Dr. Doreen answered during that particular episode. There are other videos there as well, including a whole series with Temple Grandin and every subject and every expert that we can find that we've interviewed over the last 4 years. So that's at Autism Live, or it's at youtube.com/autism-live. We also have our own website, autism-live.com, and we're available on Roku and iTunes. It's free everywhere that you go. We don't really have time, but I'm going to put you through your paces for this last 3-minute question. If you would answer, this came into us on our live feature. Hello, I need help with my son. They just diagnosed him with autism. He is a 6-year-old boy. He is not verbal. I watched one video you have about recovery. He's just has one speech therapy. I need help. It makes me emotional.
Yes. It's a very difficult situation, and I hope that this viewer is with us now. Please do the following things. I don't know where you are. It sounds like you may not be in the US, but that you have access to a few websites where we have developed companies that will help you. The first place that I would recommend you go is the Institute for Behavioral Training, ibehavioraltraining.com, and go on there and start training as a parent. This is very low cost, and you can learn all about autism, ABA, how to teach. You learn the techniques, okay? This will take you several months. Get involved and start doing it right away. As you're doing this, also go to another website, which is skillsforautism.com. And on the skills website, start answering questions about your child. That's called the skills index or assessment do the assessment about your child, the long assessment. Answer all the questions. It'll take you a while. The questions are, can your child do various things, yes or no? So as you're doing the assessment, you're learning the techniques, okay? Learn the techniques, but the assessment is very important because when you finish the assessment, it will produce a curriculum for you. It will tell you anything that your child cannot do. Skills will show you how to teach it. It'll give you all the content. If your child doesn't speak, we'll get your child speaking. It'll teach you all the different things, lessons, hundreds of lessons that you will need to teach your child over the next 3 to 4 years to get your child functioning better, okay? In every area, whether it's language or play or social cognition, whatever it is, go on Skills. It's packed with content. It's the biggest curriculum you can find. It has every skill that a human being should have, and you will be able to select them based on what your child needs. Now, at the same time, you need ABA training, and you're going to get that from IBT, Institute for Behavioral Training. What I also recommend you do is you try to rally up family members, friends, neighbors, students, high school students, college students, people who want to be able to be part of your team. This is not something you can do alone. It is very difficult as a single parent to do this. You'll need a team of 4 or 5 people to be with you and learn the techniques. And then what you do is you take all of your child's free time, all of it. I don't care how much free time they have. If they're not doing school, you have them doing ABA. And you divide all those hours, let's say 30 hours of free time a week, including weekends, including evenings, all the time. And you divide it amongst yourself and these 4 or 5 other team members, and each of you sit down and you start doing the ABA that you learned on IBT, teaching the content that you learned on Skills to your child, and I promise you they'll do better. You just need to get the team going, train everyone, and start doing this intervention. Now, if you are somewhere close to an ABA provider, whether it's CARD or someone else, please just contact the ABA provider because it's really a lot for a parent to take on. You can do it. I've had parents do it very successfully, but if you're close to someone who can give you assistance, please contact them.
Wonderful. We're out of time, unfortunately, but we really want to thank you and thank all the viewers who are with us today from all around the world. There were a lot of different resources that Dr. Granpeesheh gave you, so I'm going to very quickly go through them. ibehavioraltraining.com for IBT, skillsforautism.com. And if you want to find out more information about Dr. Granpeesheh, you can go to centerforautism.com. And if you want to find out more about what CARD does, the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, go there, centerforautism.com, click on the locations tab and see where the closest office is to you. For more information on Autism Live, go to autism-live.com or visit us on any of the sites where we're free, YouTube, iTunes, Roku, Stitcher, all of those places, and see some of the other videos that we've done. Tell your friends, if you liked us on Facebook Live, let us know. But otherwise, next week we're going to be back on autism-live.com. Same time, just on a different channel. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you to Dr. Granpeesheh. Bye-bye for now.